Panel is open for questions.
Very quickly. I'm on all of the sites you're talking about. However, my problem is the amount of time I'm spending to maintain those sites. Because it isn't just that I post on one or post on another. There's also the cross-linking, all right, and the relative differences between what happens on a personal basis, which I may put on a Facebook comment, but business-wise, I may want to tweet and LinkedIn. But they do need to, and then I've got my own blog. So how much time do you spend daily on doing all of this, and how do you resolve that?
I'll take a stab at it. Oh, I still have this one. Sorry. I'm actually quite loud, so you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, to answer your question, you don't actually need to go on multiple sites. There are tools that allow you from one platform to post what you want. So take a look at a website called, or a software tool called TweetDeck. TweetDeck.com. Take a look at something called Hootsuite, HOOTSUITE, Hootsuite.com. There's also something called Rockpile.com. What these tools do is you can set up all your accounts into that one sort of software, and so you have your LinkedIn, your Facebook, your Twitter. In fact, you can have multiple Twitter. I manage 6 Twitter accounts, right? So you can have multiple Twitter accounts, and you can have one comment and just check mark where you want it to go. The other thing you can also do is all of these sites work with each other. So there is an app on Facebook which allows you to automatically post your status updates to Twitter. There is a button on Twitter that you can intelligently say, when I end my comment with the hashtag IN, I want only those comments to show up on my LinkedIn. And when I do a hashtag FB, I want to show up on my Facebook. So you can control with just one tool. It's possible. Oh, and how much time do I spend? I spend about an hour or so a day. I probably do it first thing in the morning. I do everything off my smartphone. I have an iPhone, but I'm sure other smartphones have the same apps. So I have all the apps on my smartphone, so sort of in the morning I'll do a quick check of what's there. I'll probably do it sometime in the afternoon, and then once again, and then on my desktop I have Hootsuite or TweetDeck or something, and then I'll just, with Hootsuite you can even schedule your tweets. So you can tweet something today and have it show up on Saturday. So you don't have to be there on Saturday. So say you're a firm and you're doing a tax breakfast seminar, and you want to make sure that you tweet about that. Or if you're a retail company and you're having this massive sale, right? And you want to make sure that this is reminded once a day, you can just schedule all those tweets. WordPress and TypePad both come with widgets. As soon as you put a blog, it will automatically update your Twitter and your Facebook and LinkedIn with your blog. So it's possible without having to jump and do it. So,
wow, that's great. Actually, that's a huge piece of information.
Thank you to all the panelists here. It's a question for everybody. So Sarah, you just mentioned that you put everything on your LinkedIn, especially giving away your entire resume on LinkedIn. But a lot of people would object to that idea, and that it's not the best thing to do with all the privacy issues and everything that's being talked all the time. A lot of people would not be comfortable putting all the information out there on LinkedIn, right? So, but you suggest clearly that it would be a good idea to market yourself.
I don't believe there are any privacy. At the end of the day, it's become, like as a lawyer, I had this law society thing about working on the cloud, and everybody's talking about, oh, but what about privacy issues? you know what, when you were sending faxes with client data, privacy was still a concern back then. When you were emailing information, privacy is still a concern. With LinkedIn, it's your public resume. So you have to say, what is it about my professional profile that is, you're not going to say things that, like if I'm putting stuff on as a lawyer, I'm not going to say, oh, my client so-and-so just settled for $600,000. I'm not, because that's a confidentiality issue. Or I'm not going to say, hey, I just scored a job at RBC for $80,000, because that may be a privacy issue. So you will have to be discreet. But what you put out there, and even with Facebook and Twitter, you control exactly what goes out there. You can do that. So all LinkedIn wants is where you are, what you do, and really, the more information you provide, so long as it's good stuff, I would encourage you to put it there.
And just to add to her comment, I mean, I sort of counsel students and have some clients on LinkedIn storytelling, so to speak. But it's not just like cut and pasting your resume into an electronic format. It's thinking, okay, how can I, and I make up words a lot, but how can I ambitiously articulate my background in a way that is ownable, or even, to quote Selena, like for people to get to know me, get to like me and trust me. So it's not being like, and there are LinkedIn profiles that are out there that are like, wow, like for me, this is one of my pet peeves, just personally, is when it says visionary at the top, because I think, wow, there's 2,000 visionaries out there, but in my mind, there's about 5. Really, I mean, I think everyone here tonight in this room has some vision in their own way to be entrepreneurs starting out. And we all have vision in a certain way, but to call yourself a visionary in your headline, on a personal branding front, it's a pretty tough proposition to fulfill. So I think just taking your resume and going, to your point, how do I tell a story now, like yours does, in a way that's like, wow, this woman's got an interesting life, and I'd like to learn more about her, and then get engaged, as opposed to, I worked here, achieved all these things, and I'm the best.
Want it to be that.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I would just add a couple things to that. I would say, I mean, if you Google me, you get honest, and it's embarrassing, like you get almost 10 or 20 pages of stuff, right? Because I do a lot of writing and speaking and stuff like that. But there's some things. For example, you will not find a photo of my kids on the internet. That's it. My kids don't have Facebook sites, and my older kid is old enough to have one. So you will not find a photo of them, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find a single name. And I'm careful in these sort of environments to not really sort of advertise and speak out. And so unlike some people, you couldn't, on those 20 pages, you would be very hard pressed to find a single reference to my kids. And then past that, because I know, like if somebody wants to know who I am, there's a layer of public stuff about me that's very apparent. But things like, as a result, I'm pretty careful about, how I use my credit card over the net or the telephone, So you have to, I think, balance those things. And then I couldn't agree more. I think there's lots of people who damage their professional reputation by putting stuff that, quite frankly, only their friends and family should know. So if I go to my wine tasting group on Saturday night and I have too much to drink and I'm hungover the next morning, that really isn't something that should ever see the light of day on the internet.
On a searchable engine.
Yeah.
I'll also add one thing. When I say put everything out there, that doesn't mean barf it out there. So, and I'll give you a quote, and this is a story which I really like it. I use it with my clients all the time because it drives home the message. So Oscar Wilde once wrote a letter to a friend, and it was a really long letter. And you know what he said in that letter at the end? He said, I apologize for sending you this really long letter, but I just didn't have the time to write a short one. And you know what that means? It takes time to be concise, to be succinct, and be effective, right? So if you're just going to say, here's my shop, now go find what you need, you haven't taken that time. But if you are clever, and you're going to pick the goods and display what's going to be attractive, then you've taken the time. So brevity is really key.
And building on that, try to think of it as, I'll use a metaphor, it's your window to your store, like it's your merchandising, like it's what you're, that's your store window. And I mean, the other thing I use, because I'm actually not on Facebook. I decided a while ago, and it's not like I'm being overly cautious. I just, because early on, even before LinkedIn, there was some of my track record in business was starting to get caught on the internet. I thought, this is great. This is going to live forever for my resume. And I just made that conscious choice. But I may eventually evolve into Facebook. And in Twitter, I'm not on it yet because I can't add value every day. So I haven't sort of got on that network. And the thing I use with my students all the time is think of Facebook as like the family room or your bedroom with posters, and then the boardroom is LinkedIn. So it's like they're completely different forums. So if you are, but as you evolve and your personal brand becomes more of your storefront, you have to be careful because your storefront becomes your social front too. So kind of, it meshes.
It's more a question to Brad. It's about confidentiality. People will send on my site confidential information for review by a third party. The third party can't see this information unless they sign an NDA. At which point then and it's an invitation only. I send you an invitation to review my stuff. You say you want to see it by signing an NDA. All right. The issue here is what protection or how can I protect against somebody who's silly enough to send something for review that is really sensitive, all right, or in retrospect is really sensitive. We try and protect them, but I don't know how to get past that point where they claim that, for instance, we're responsible for their idea leaking because somehow or other it got on our site.
So typically, it's an interesting question. It's the whole question about how do you avoid being infected with the confidential information of third parties. Either, the worst case is they just push it in your direction, you don't want it, but suddenly you've got it. But you also have that problem in the context of more structured or evolved business relationships as well. So one thing is, it's a good thing to point out that you really want to avoid that situation. I once was involved with a client, big multinational telecommunications company. They were shut out of a multi-billion-dollar per year line of business because years before they had signed a contract with somebody where they had agreed to take the other party's know-how. And they had technical exchanges, they had engineers and other people visiting back and forth, and ultimately they concluded that they could not break into a multi-billion-dollar line of business because they thought they'd be sued because they had been infected with too much confidential information. So one thing that you can do is you can do what a lot of, this is a very common problem for the people who have this in spades are games manufacturer, Hasbro, Mattel, people like that. People are always sending ideas to them. I've got a great idea for a new board game, a new, kids game, something like that. So typically, both on websites now, but also, in terms of correspondence, they have what's called an anti-confidentiality agreement, right? Which says, until we enter into some sort of a legal contract, anything you send me is not confidential. I can do anything I want with it, and it's your tough luck. The legal language is more, sort of diplomatic. Yeah. It's more formal than that, but that's the essence of it. Right. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, assuming you do have a contract with people, then you also, both as a sender and a receiver, in some circumstances you want to be careful. You don't just say, anything you send me is confidential, and you may want to structure that to say, well, I only want this type of information, or I only want information for this purpose, and that's all this confidentiality agreement. Like, I would be very hesitant to sign a let's say you, I just met you tonight, you look like a very nice guy. But I would be very hesitant to sign an agreement with you where I said, anything you tell me is confidential. I don't know what you're going to tell me. And especially, the interesting thing about the law of confidentiality is there are certain things, like if I say, anything you tell me is confidential, that contract may be binding even if I already knew it, or even if I could get it from somewhere else. So the law of confidentiality is actually quite challenging in some respects.
Any more questions?
So that works the same as an NDA? Like, what if you want to
get somebody to sign an NDA or?
Well, we'll sign it, you know. It's interesting. I reviewed an NDA yesterday, in fact. And the interesting thing, most people, like NDAs are pretty common agreements. Often organizations that would, you know, send most contracts up to a senior level manager or legal counsel. Anybody gets to sign an NDA. One of the challenges with NDAs is in my experience, about 5% of the time, people sneak a clause in, right? So this happened to me just yesterday, where it was a standard vanilla NDA until we got to the clause that said, notwithstanding or despite anything else in this agreement, the recipient can use the confidential information for any purpose to improve its products and market new products, and it totally turned on the face everything else in the agreement. And you think that is, you know, it's rare, but it's not uncommon. Like I see a lot of confidentiality or non-disclosure agreements, and I see that about 5% of the time. And it's huge, right? Because that essentially, for a client, this client is a sort of technology licensing business, that totally would have undermined the whole forward-going relationship. So you really have to read them carefully and know what you're reading.
I'll probably add one more thing, just putting on my lawyer hat for a few minutes, is one other thing you have to look for in a confidentiality agreement or an NDA is how long is it valid for? Too often, you know, people will leave it as if it's indefinite. Well, first of all, it's very difficult to enforce a confidentiality agreement that's indefinite. But if there's somewhere you want to push back, you want to say, okay, this is reasonable for 3 years or 2 years or 5 years or whatever, but you want to have some sort of a termination date because you cannot perpetually be held responsible for maintaining that. So a lot of people, you know, don't pay attention to that, but I think in addition to that sneaky sharp practice of invalidating the entire confidentiality agreement with a clause like that, also look at the time period.
Can I point out something? At least in the U.S., where I'm a little more familiar with it, our contract really doesn't have any validity if it doesn't have a date and a term. Because otherwise, with nothing stated, it's implied infinite amount of time, and nothing is infinite legally or in any other way. So it would tend to invalidate the contract. It's a hazy area, so you should have a date range in effect on the document, almost regardless of what type of document it is.
I'm just curious, in the U.S., for example, if you have an idea for a company, or you can pretty well put a trademark on it very easily, very inexpensively compared to Canada, have they improved trademark laws here in such a way that you can take, say, a branding idea and say, okay, I'm going to put a trademark to it?
Yeah, I mean, my experience is somewhat different from that. I mean, to apply for a trademark, typically, I'd say it's double the cost in the States, so I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. But in both countries, you know, relative to other forms of protection like patents, trademarks are relatively inexpensive. But I wasn't aware that it's cheaper in the U.S. In fact, my experience is the opposite, that I would typically advise clients to put double. Yeah, end to end in the States, about $4,000. In Canada, probably half that. You know, on average, for the average case.
I thought he was referring to the time it takes to register a trademark.
Oh, the time or the money?
The total cost is obviously your opportunity cost and your financial cost. There's a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, certainly time is a very big issue too. The Canadian trademark or Canadian Intellectual Property Office is getting better and has improved, especially on the trademark side, it's improved a lot over the last couple of years.
So I would just like to make a comment regarding the confidentiality thing. When I share some information, confidential information with someone, I generate a PDF which is password protected with the recipient's name or something that we have agreed upon. So if that information ever leaks out, that PDF cannot be changed and it is protected by that password, and you can figure out by knowing, okay, 5 or 10 people that you have given it to who released that information.
No, understood.
Well, thank you so much.
What a wonderful session it's turned out to be. I was a little apprehensive about this new location, and I'm delighted. And in fact, it's so interesting that we spend so much time on social media. We do have a session coming after this on 17th of November on leveraging your network. The next session is on structuring your startup. It's at Faskins. We're moving back to the same location. And the session is sponsored by the company, so we'll have top-of-the-line speakers, essentially dealing on how to select the form of business ownership, particularly from the point of view of tax efficiency. And today, we want to thank our August speakers for making this session wonderful. A round of applause for them, please. May I request Thai President Suresh Madam to come over here and fix.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thanks very
Peter,
much.
thank you.
Just one last announcement. Next week, we are creating the mentorship registration link. I will be sending to all the attendees this link. Those who have attended already 5 sessions can apply for it. We'll go through the matching process and get back to the individuals. And as usual, please take a couple of minutes to fill the feedback forms. Thank you.
Thank you.